In this video, you're going to learn about the importance of your relationship with your tech team or your AV team, whatever you call them at your church. You're going to learn how to strengthen your relationship with them so that you can serve your church better. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below, and let's get into it, because today we're talking about you and your tech team, you and your sound guy, you and your slide operator, you and your lighting operator, whatever technical positions you have at your church. You probably have recognized that your relationship with those people as a worship leader is very important, and you probably find that you are working with them maybe even more than some of your worship team members, because they're the ones that unmute you and turn the lights on so that people can see and hear you. So, needless to say, your relationship with them is extremely important, and in this video, I just want to talk about that relationship, and I think this is on my mind because as of me filming this video, next week I've actually got an AV/tech team. We call it the AV ministry at my church, but I also call it the tech team. So I'll probably be switching back and forth in this video, but we've got a training coming up next weekend. So this has been on my mind, and I've been thinking about it a lot recently, and it's really... I've just been thinking about the importance of the relationship that we have as worship leaders and worship team members with our tech team. So in this video, I just want to share a few quick ways that you can strengthen that relationship, because that's going to allow you to lead your church well and lead worship well, because you guys are actually leading worship together, you and your tech team. Before we get into that, though, I want to hear from you just up front. On a scale from 1 to 10, how good is your relationship with your tech team? Let us know in the comments below, and I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your answer down below. Let's learn, how do we strengthen our relationship with our tech team members? The first thing to do to strengthen your relationship with your tech/AV team is to teach them that their job is equally as important as yours, if not more important than yours. If you get up on stage on Sunday morning, and you've experienced this before, you get up on stage and you go to talk into the microphone and it's not on, right? This is like the worst feeling in the world, but every time that happens to me, that reminds me of the importance of the AV team's job, because if they don't unmute my microphone, people can't hear me. If they don't unmute my guitar, people can't hear my guitar. If they don't turn the lights on, people can't see me. I could go on and on. If the slide operator doesn't switch to the next slide, then people in our congregation aren't going to know what to sing. And so at the end of the day, the AV/tech team ministry volunteers, their job is more important or equally as important as our jobs. And so we want to teach that to them, or remind them of that, because number one, it's going to develop them as volunteers, and they're going to recognize the importance of what they do. I think a lot of times, and I've served on tech teams before, and you just kind of think, I'm in the back of the church. Nobody knows I'm here. I'm back in the sound booth, wherever your tech team is located, and nobody knows about me. And so my job must not be that important. But like I just said, all of those things, if you don't do your job, then you realize how important your job actually is. So it's not just, where I was going with that is, I think sometimes tech team members think, I'm just here to be like a monkey pressing buttons. Like, we could train a monkey to do this. We could train a monkey to hit the next slide to get to the next thing, or we could just automate it with Ableton. I've seen that a lot, which is viable. I've seen that work well. But I think there's more to it than just a monkey pressing buttons, right? It's an art form, especially when it comes to like mixing. I think a lot of volunteer sound guys at churches don't understand that, probably because we just asked them to help at the church and they were nice enough to do it, and we're thankful that they do it. But mixing audio is like, it's a skill. You're basically playing an instrument whenever you do it. And so I just lay all of that out because we want to teach our team that what they do is important. We want to teach the tech team that what they do is of utmost importance. And when they recognize that, they'll probably take their job more seriously. When you say, hey, when the microphone isn't unmuted, when I go up to talk, like that disrupts the flow of the worship service. When the slides aren't to the next, when the lyric slides aren't to the next lyrics when they're supposed to be, that disrupts the flow of the worship service. And we aren't saying that to criticize them. We're trying to help them see the importance of their job. So it elevates their understanding of their importance as a volunteer in the church and the role that they're serving in, but it also just lets them know that like you honor them. You recognize the importance of their job because maybe they're sitting back there and they're thinking all of those things that I just said. They're thinking, man, like if I wasn't here today, nobody could see you or hear you or sing along with you. And so we want to recognize that. That's the first step, is to let them know that they are equally, their job, not them as a person, but their job, their role on a Sunday is equally as important, if not more important, than your job as a worship leader. On to number 2, and that is to teach them that they are a part of your worship ministry. Oftentimes I think it's easy to sort of separate the tech people and the worship people, even though we're working together a lot. I just made it look like we're butting heads a lot together a lot. Maybe that was subconscious, but I just remember like back in the day, whenever there were wedges, and maybe you still use wedge monitors on your stage, and it was like a constant battle. I remember this in my church growing up. It was like a constant battle of like trying to find the perfect monitor volume on stage without making the sound guy angry that there was too much stage noise. We don't really run into that anymore with in-ears, but in your church, maybe you still run into that because you use wedges, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. We aren't butting heads, though. I'm talking about how we work together as one group. And I don't know how it is structured at your church, but at my church, the tech team falls under the umbrella of the worship ministry because it is part of the worship ministry. And I think that you could even go as far to teach, just like we teach our worship team members that they are worship leaders. I think it's perfectly acceptable to teach your tech team that they are worship leaders. Think about that definition of worship leader that I always use. A worship leader is what? A worship leader is someone who points people to the worthiness of God and provides them with the opportunity to respond. Is that what your tech team does on a Sunday morning? Are they pointing people to the worthiness of God? Yes, by allowing the worship leader to lead well by unmuting them, mixing the levels well so that people can hear and understand what they're saying. If they're running lights, then they're allowing people to see the pastor and the worship leader on stage, who ultimately, I hope, point people to the worthiness of God. The slide operator, they're putting words up on the screen that people see that points them to the worthiness of God. So yes, they point people to the worthiness of God. Do they provide them with the opportunity to respond? 100%. Once again, the slide operator. You're providing people with the opportunity to respond to the worthiness of God by giving them the words to sing. So, all that to say, I would go as far, and I think I'm going to do this whenever I lead the tech team training next week at my church. I'm going to teach them that they are worship leaders because they point people to the worthiness of God and they allow them to have the opportunity to respond to that truth. So teach your tech team that they are not just monkeys in the back pressing buttons, right? But they are worship leaders. They're a part of your worship ministry, and I think that will only elevate their role and help them see and value their role as a not just person in the back hitting a couple buttons, but as a worship ministry member. So let them know that they are part of the worship ministry. And finally, number 3, So far, we've kind of covered like teaching, like mindset stuff, like, hey, your job is super important and you're a worship leader. And we can teach that. We can say that to them once or twice. But I think those things work better when we reinforce them over and over again, not just through our words, but through our actions. And so, number 3 is an action step that we can take to strengthen our relationship with our tech teams, and that is to include them in your worship rehearsals. In your midweek rehearsal, if you have one, on Sunday morning, as you're running through the songs, I would hope that they're there to make sure everything's working, but I know how it is in church. Sometimes they just show up 5 minutes before the service starts, right? So hopefully, if we've raised up their understanding of the importance of their role, then they're going to take what they do seriously and they're going to understand that they need to be there for rehearsals. But we also want to include them in rehearsals so that they feel valued and they feel like they're actually a part of the worship team. So whenever I do this AV training here next week, I'm going to be pushing for my tech people to show up earlier on Sunday mornings and to be a part of our midweek rehearsals. Because, not just because I want them to be here for the sake of being here, but because I want them to be here so that, number one, they can feel like they're a part of the worship ministry and we aren't just using them on a Sunday morning, but I want them to actually be part of the team. But also, like I said before, I think that mixing, at least your sound guy should be here at your rehearsals. Probably your slide operator too. And if you have like extravagant lighting, probably your lighting person as well. And maybe this is just common sense to you, but I know a lot of churches don't do this. We want them to be here so that they can practice their quote unquote instrument. Like the mixing console, the soundboard, is an instrument because it is a collection of all of the audio sources coming through it, and then you're tweaking and manipulating those audio sources, those instruments, to create one sound, which is like what an instrument does. If you think about it, a guitar has 6 strings, so each of those strings add up to create the instrumental sound of a guitar. On your soundboard, your vocalists and your guitar players and your bass player and your drummer and your keyboardist, all of those are pieces of the instrument that your sound person mixes. And so they need time to practice that. And you can't just practice that once a month on Sunday morning or however often you run sound. You actually need to take time to practice that and figure out EQ and compression and reverb and all of that different stuff so that you can play your instrument well. So that's another reason to include them in your rehearsals. Same thing for the slide operators. And I keep looking like back here because I'm right in front of my tech booth right now. So I'm looking back at like where the slide operator would be. And I just think about how that timing of when you hit to the next slide is so important. And that's why a lot of people have automated it with Ableton, which is good, but not every church has that luxury. So they need to practice that and get that timing down and learn the songs that you're going to be leading on Sunday morning, because if they don't know them, then they're not going to know when to hit the slide, and they're not going to know how to follow you when you skip back to a chorus from before when you weren't planning on it. So, include your tech team in your worship rehearsals. There it was. I think if you do those 3 things, it's going to really strengthen the AV tech ministry at your church. If you teach them that their job is equally as important, if not more important than yours, if you teach them that they are part of your worship ministry, and not just a part of your worship ministry, but they're a worship leader who points people to the worthiness of God and provides them with the opportunity to respond just like everyone else on your worship team. And then number 3, take that action step of actually including them in your worship rehearsals, and do it not where they just show up in the back of the room and you never talk to them, but like invite them to your worship team devotionals. Whenever you do that, invite them to pray with you, include them as a team member in your worship rehearsals. And speaking of worship rehearsals, if you haven't yet checked out the worship rehearsal blueprint that I put together, check that out down in the description below. That's going to teach you how to have the best worship rehearsal that you've ever had, where you can lead your team well, spiritually, relationally, and musically. So it's a whole plan for that, completely free, down in the description below. So check that out. And other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.